Get off my property right now. That's how it all started. A full-throated command from the HOA president, Mary Pierce, while 3 black SUVs boxed me in like I'd committed a felony just for unlocking my own inherited cabin. You ever hit rock bottom so hard that every new start feels like a miracle? Yeah, that was me, freshly divorced, barely holding it together, standing in the driveway of my late uncle's place, hoping this rundown patch of woods might finally offer something like peace. Instead, I'm met with Mary, all 5'2" of pure HOA fury, treating me like some trespasser who'd snuck through the fence at midnight. She didn't know it yet, but the whole power dynamic was about to flip on its head. You ever see a control freak unravel? Stick around. Mary looked like a CEO who'd been handed a sheriff's badge by mistake, marching toward me with a folder clutched to her chest like it contained national secrets. Community liability with deceased owners, inheritance verification, covenant violations, she rattled off, brandishing documents and authority with the air of someone who rehearsed this stuff in the mirror. She made it sound like I was a squatter, not a guy picking up the pieces of his life in a cabin left to him legally, fair and square. But that wasn't the only welcome committee. Right behind Mary came Rebecca Shaw, smile so polished you could see the calculation in it. Estate planning specialist, she announced, extending a hand as if we'd met before. Helped your Uncle Jim with all his affairs. There was something off about Rebecca. She offered condolences with the same tone as someone reciting a weather report, then started asking questions that dug a little too deep. Divorce finances, employment, family support. She was building a psychological file on me, and I could feel it. I should have trusted my gut. Then came Kevin Torres, trailing behind like Mary's personal Secret Service. The man screamed military, rigid, scanning the horizon, hair cut sharp enough to slice bread. Community security. He introduced himself, trying so hard to project confidence you could almost see it slip. Marine vet, out of work, desperate to feel needed. When he glanced at Mary for approval, it was obvious who ran the show. An hour after Mary and her sidekicks left, Frank Morrison shuffled over from next door. Old-timer, hands trembling, eyes haunted. I failed your uncle, he said without preamble, and it landed like a punch. He kept telling me something was off with that Rebecca woman. Too interested in property values, too helpful with estate planning. I thought he was just getting paranoid. That was the first sign that things weren't what they seemed. That night, digging through Uncle Jim's desk, I found a letter addressed to me in shaky handwriting. Charles, if you're reading this, I failed to protect what matters most. Rebecca's been planning something for years. Don't trust anyone till you know what's really happening. Check the old survey documents in the basement. You'll see why they want this land. My hands shook as I read it. A warning from the grave, urging me to dig deeper. The next day, Rebecca showed up with a casserole, smile even brighter than before. You know that feeling when someone's being too helpful and it just makes your skin crawl? She'd baked comfort food, but somehow knew every detail about my divorce, my finances, stuff I'd never told a soul around here. And it wasn't just me. Over the next few days, she worked the neighborhood, cookies in hand, probing every house for intel about the new guy in Jim's cabin. She asked about my employment, my moods, my routines, planting seeds of suspicion. A neighbor told me Rebecca had spent nearly an hour grilling her about my mental health, whether I'd seemed stable, if I'd said anything concerning. Rebecca's real skill wasn't baking. It was character assassination disguised as community concern. She'd sit in living rooms sipping coffee, talking in hushed tones about how divorce trauma can manifest in unpredictable ways. By the time she left, folks were convinced I was a walking red flag. Then she crossed a line. She called my boss, claiming to be checking up on me for community safety. My boss called me in, confused, asking if there was something he needed to know. Rebecca had turned my job into a battlefield too. Frank started noticing Rebecca's questions weren't about helping. They were about vulnerabilities. She wanted to know if Uncle Jim had been confused, if he'd changed his will, if he'd been pressured. She was digging for weaknesses to exploit. Then came the worst. A neighbor told me Rebecca was spreading word about a restraining order filed during my divorce, one that had been thrown out almost instantly. She twisted it, painting me as unstable and dangerous. I went back to Uncle Jim's papers and found his notes, years of careful documentation. He'd clocked Rebecca's move-in just weeks after his cancer diagnosis went public, tracked her questions, logged her helpful visits. And there, buried in his handwriting, were warnings. She's done this before. Always targets communities with sick or elderly residents. Always pushes for estate details. It was chilling. Frank showed up with a stack of boxes Jim had left in his garage, boxes he'd never opened. Inside were logs of every interaction Jim had with Rebecca, dates, times, exact quotes. She'd wormed her way in, offering legal help, checking on mental competency, planting doubts about Jim's ability to manage his affairs. Kevin, meanwhile, was being weaponized. His security rounds were really data-gathering missions for Mary and Rebecca. They tracked every family's schedules, arguments, financial trouble, all under the guise of community safety. The real bombshell came when Rebecca organized informal safety meetings with parents, painting me as a threat to children based on nothing but twisted facts and innuendo. She never made outright accusations, just implied there was a pattern of danger with men like me, divorced, alone, struggling. The community started to split. Some folks believed I was being railroaded, others bought the narrative. Mary turned Rebecca's rumors into official HOA policy, documenting every incident, beefing up patrols, treating me like a ticking time bomb. That's when Frank and I decided to dig up the survey documents Jim had mentioned. We found them in the basement. Maps, legal files, boundary markers showing Uncle Jim's land ran way farther than anyone realized. Turns out, the playground, community center, mailbox cluster, pretty much all the shared facilities, were on my land. 6.2 acres worth. The HOA had been operating on private property for 16 years with zero legal claim. Word spread like wildfire. People who'd been convinced I was the villain suddenly realized the playground existed at my discretion. HOA fees had gone to maintain stuff on land they didn't own. Parents panicked, meetings turned chaotic, and Mary's iron grip started to slip. Rebecca didn't back down. She pivoted, positioning herself as the only one who could save the neighborhood from me, calling me a predatory landlord. Mary doubled down too, framing me as an outsider exploiting their way of life. Doors closed. Conversations stopped mid-sentence when I walked by. Local businesses started avoiding me. The whole neighborhood shunned me like I was contagious. Then Rebecca got even dirtier. She filed complaints with my licensing board, tried to sabotage my career, even contacted my ex-wife, spinning a story about my declining mental state. She'd created a perfect storm: social, professional, and personal destruction. Kevin, meanwhile, was starting to break. He realized he'd been gathering blackmail material for Mary and Rebecca under the guise of security. When he overheard Mary talking about development timeline acceleration with her business partner, about forcing a sale so they could move forward with a project, he snapped, bringing me the proof. Then Frank found digital recordings Uncle Jim had made, capturing Rebecca admitting to her real motives, paying off a $50,000 gambling debt by targeting elderly property owners for quick, cheap acquisitions. We compiled everything: notes, recordings, survey maps, timelines. The evidence painted a picture of a systematic campaign to isolate, intimidate, and defraud vulnerable people out of their homes. Frank and Kevin confronted Mary and Rebecca at an HOA meeting, laying out the whole scheme in front of the neighbors. Mary lost it, yelling, threatening to expose everyone's secrets, warning she'd take half the community down if they turned on her. Rebecca fired back, filing police reports accusing me of elder abuse, claiming Uncle Jim's death was suspicious and I'd manipulated him into changing his will. But this time, the authorities listened. Uncle Jim's hospice doctor provided clear records. Jim was sharp until the end, had made his wishes clear, and trusted me completely. Police dug into Rebecca's background and found a trail of similar scams across multiple states. She was arrested for fraud, harassment, conspiracy, the works. Mary was removed from her post and faced a mountain of lawsuits. The fallout split the neighborhood wide open. Some folks were horrified by what they'd been part of, others just angry about the threat to their amenities. But for the first time, people started talking about how easy it is to get swept up in fear and let authority figures weaponize your trust. Watching Mary get dragged out of a meeting in front of the whole community, red-faced, screaming, reputation in ruins, was a kind of poetic justice I didn't even know I needed. Kevin publicly confessed how his trauma had been used against him. Frank, finally vindicated, wept as he read Jim's notes to the crowd. The neighborhood set up a memorial fund for Jim, vowing no elderly person would ever face that kind of targeting again. Mary's last-ditch lawsuits went nowhere. No one wanted to touch her case. She went from neighborhood tyrant to total pariah in under 6 months. Rebecca, banned from HOAs for life, was sentenced to probation, restitution, and therapy. The truth, for once, actually won out. You know, there's a certain beauty in watching people get exactly what they deserve, especially when they've spent years dodging accountability. Justice took its sweet time, but when it finally hit, it hit hard. Maybe that's the real moral here. You never really know how deep the rot goes until someone's desperate enough, or stubborn enough, to dig it all up and throw it in the sunlight. So what do you think? Was justice served, or did the punishment not go far enough? Would you trust an HOA again after something like this? Drop your thoughts below. Let's hear how your community would have handled it. And hey, if you've ever watched a control freak get their comeuppance, you know just how sweet that moment tastes.